Hello, everyone. Deborah Hamilton, back from New York. You're with me on my MAAP community call. I'm so glad you're here. And tonight we're going to talk about preparing for a disaster because a lot of our community members are living in disaster zone. Connie Kohler's living in Los Angeles. She's having floods and mudslides. Thank God she's not up in the mountains because they're having floods, landslides, and snowbound. And then my other friend, Sally, is having 12 to 15 inches of snow and ice in New England. These are things that you really need to prepare for. If you are anywhere in the United States this week, the weather was pretty awesomely terrible. And your pets are the ones you need to make sure you plan for, as well as yourself. There is never a time where you shouldn't plan for your own care and for your own escape, or at least preparation. So let's go through that, because it's one of the D's, because we have 10 or 11 D's now. And one of them is disaster. And we often talk about Superstorm Sandy, and we often talk about Hurricane Katrina. And now we're going to talk about the river snows and the river rains of California, and then the apocalyptic snows that are falling in the New York area, upstate, and into the Connecticut area and into Albany. I got a picture from my friend Amanda Luby, who's an attorney colleague of mine, and she has at least 12 inches of snow. Snow is a stopper. It stops. Here in North Carolina, they don't get much snow, although I have to tell you, it's as cold here in North Carolina on the Eastern Shore as it is in New York, and was colder than it was when I was visiting over the weekend. So you really have to be worried about, if you're in my area, frozen pipes, because people don't necessarily shut off their outside water or take their hose bibs off, because if it gets so cold, it'll freeze back up and burst your pipes. Your pets need the water, so you need to have water close to where you are. So we've talked about being ready to get out at a moment's notice if something is happening. Now in California, the floods are creating landslides. The snows are creating snowing conditions where you can't get out. When these storms are forecasted, I know that sometimes you feel as if they're crying wolf. However, they're not crying wolf. It is a time when you really need to prepare both for yourself and your pets. So make sure you have enough hay and enough water, that the waters don't get frozen because it's so cold, that you get enough food in to care for the horses, that you have a generator, because if you have birds or lizards or snakes, if you lose electricity, which most of the people in the California mountains did, and most of the people in New England did, what are you going to do for your pets who need a warm environment? Yes, you can set them up in the car and turn the car on and run it. It doesn't use that much gasoline, but then you have to make sure you absolutely vent the car's exhaust, because you don't want to make sure, sorry, my nose is running. I think I got a cold while I was traveling. But you need to make sure that your pets are well cared for. So additional food. If you're running low and there's a storm on the way, make sure, if the Chewy can't deliver it, if you get it from Chewy and Chewy can't deliver it before the storm comes, go and pay the extra $5 or $10 for even just a small bag. I'd get a big bag, because if you're one of the people stuck in the mountains of California for the last 10 or 12 days, a small bag of dog chow would not have lasted Junie. And then make sure you get food and water for yourself, because it really is so important to make sure that your pets are cared for. Hi, Susan. I started right on time because I wanted to make sure everyone understood that it is so important to prepare for disasters. Connie is living in a disaster zone with the flooding and the mudslides, and Sally is living right now in a disaster zone because of the snows. She thankfully, I went and stayed with her on Saturday, and we were expecting a big snowstorm that never materialized. It actually was very interesting. A 10-minute ride to the northwest got 12 inches of snow. And at Sally's house and Gordon's house, where Roxy and Athena live, no snow. Cold, a little bit of rain, no snow. But now they do have snow. They've gotten about 4 or 5 inches, which doesn't seem to be terrible. And so you can still get around. But had they gotten the 12 inches of snow that, oh God, the town above them, Litchfield, got, they would have been bogged down and not been able to get out. So they would have had to make sure they had enough food for their dogs. And as I said before, the important piece is if you have animals that need to be kept warm. So those are your birds, those are your, your snakes, your fish need pumping in their tanks. You really need to make sure that you have a generator that you can at least plug those tanks into. So you might get a portable generator that you put outside under a tarp. You're going to need gasoline. So you got to put some gasoline around somewhere so that you can get to it, so that you can keep your animals warm. And water pumping and everything working so that your pets will survive. And remember, really important to get enough water and food for yourself as well, and blankets, and make sure that maybe you have firewood so that you can burn a fire, or if you have gas, that the gas is filled so that you can run your gas fireplace. We now have a gas fireplace, much to my chagrin here in North Carolina, both inside and outside our house. And I have to say, they throw an incredible amount of heat, so that if we lost everything and we didn't have a generator, which we do, we would be able to exist on the heat being thrown by the propane fireplace we have. The interesting thing is that if we didn't have electricity, we didn't have a generator, the fan that pushes the hot air out of the fireplace would not be running. So that's why you really need to think about what you need to do to keep yourself safe in a disaster, to keep your pets safe in a disaster. I've spoken to so many people with horses, and it really is a matter of life or death sometimes for our horses, given the mudslides, given the flooding, where they're up to their bellies in mud. This is not something that's, oh, the sky is falling, Chicken Little. It really does happen. So before I go on anymore, Susan, tell us how everything is with Maggie and how the weather is by you.
Well, the weather is really bright and sunny today. It's a little bit cooler, but we've had virtually no snow all winter, and things are going to be getting warmer. But getting back to Maggie, my son has putty that he uses to exercise the muscles in his hand, and Maggie got a hold of a tub of putty yesterday and she ate it. I know, it never occurred to me to think that she would eat something like that.
Well, it isn't food, but it might smell good.
Yeah, it doesn't really have an odor to it, and I don't know what drew her to that. And
well, it might be his smell on the putty because he uses it. Did you read the jar? Did it say it was toxic or is it non-toxic?
Well, it's silicone putty. I try to stay away from anything that's toxic, and she didn't seem to be affected by it at all, and she had a big BM this morning. so
hopefully it left the way
out
a different way than it came in, but it left.
Yeah, I think it came out, and it's just, I'm trying to get my husband to help me with the barking issue and spraying water on her when she, and I just, before I got on the meeting here, Joe was getting on his meeting and the dog was going berserk, and nothing we did was going to stop the barking. So
oh God.
I'm getting a little bit crazy from all of this, to tell you the truth. I desperately need to find a trainer to work with Maggie. I don't know if it's too late.
So it's never too late. Old dogs can learn new tricks. And especially because if you, God forbid, ever had to evacuate, you would have to put Maggie in a situation where she was safe and people were safe from Maggie. So training is never too late. And, you know, speaking to your vet about an alternate to the other person who you were going to have help, but that you asked a question about some things and then she backed out. Maybe she would do it on a day-to-day basis where Maggie would go to her for an hour or so and then come home. Or she would have that conversation with you. Or maybe your vet has another person who they work with who would be a little better. And then of course there are people who take Maggie. So Sarah Hodgson up in New York takes dogs for 2 or 3 weeks, and
Really?
she has a contract that you can ask her questions about how the dog will live with her family and see if she would take Maggie to try to see if she could break Maggie of her issues. She lives up in the Bedford area in New York, and she takes dogs for 2 weeks and works with them. And because I know her really well, I'm almost positive, because we've had these conversations, that she has an agreement that lets you know how Maggie will live, what happens if Maggie gets hurt, how Maggie will be kept, you know, the kind of training techniques that she uses, because she's nationally renowned for what she does. So
yeah, I'm all in. And if I can find a way to get Maggie there and back home, if there's a transportation company that could take her, because I'm not going to be able to do that, but
so I'm going to put in the chat for everyone and for you. I believe that it's Sarah Says Pets. Let me look up here because I just sent it to someone else. Yep, here it is. www. Sarah Says Pets. And she will be happy to at least let you know if she can help. I mean, that's of course our first piece of what we need to do. And then here, this is the website, and I think it's the same, but I will put it in here anyway. And you can use my name and say that I sent you because she is a good friend of mine and does miracle things with dogs. However, what will happen and what will have to occur and why she might not take Maggie is because she would have to work with you to make sure you and your husband and your son follow through on what she's training Maggie to do. Because if that follow through isn't done, I know that you talked to Kathy Madsen and she gave you some tips. And you talked to, I think, Doug Poynter, who lives in the
I didn't
Virginia
get around
area.
to talking to Doug, but you know,
Does
Kathy
he
was
take
great.
dogs and train them, Doug?
I'm sorry?
Area? Does Doug take dogs in the Virginia area?
You know, I don't know. I never really got around to talking to Doug, and you know, because my life was so overwhelming at times.
And I think part of that overwhelm is probably because of Maggie's naughtiness. And so
it is,
maybe,
and I really want to get that under control. And if
So-
Sarah, you know, would be willing, and we could do the meetings by Zoom.
right.
Would be more than
And Doug
happy.
is close by. So if Doug can do it as well, because I'm not sure what his protocol is either, but I'm sure he would not be adverse to answering questions about where Maggie would be staying and what would happen if Maggie got hurt and what are the techniques he uses to get her to, you know, behave. That would be something, those are questions that everyone should ask their pet.
Yeah.
And you really need your pets to be well behaved in a disaster. I have to say that Junie was barking a lot today because my son Thomas is still here and he likes to stomp around the house like a monster. and that unnerves Junie. So he barks incessantly. And so I know the unnervedness that you feel when your dog is barking incessantly, because it just makes your brain rattle in your head.
Yeah.
So if we can get Maggie to stop barking incessantly, I mean, there's always bark collars, but I don't know if she barks through a bark collar. But
She
it's always,
might very well, and yeah, she could get hurt from those.
she could, absolutely. My dogs have never, I've had one or two, not you, you are not, I'm not talking about you anymore. I was talking about you. I have never had a dog get any sort of burn or anything from the bark collars, because they continuously barked until they were hurt. They actually, because most of the dogs who bark like this are smart enough to know, ooh, I don't like that, so I'm going to stop doing this. They
Yeah.
might find something else to do that's either as annoying or annoying anyway. So you'd have to really make sure that you put something together so that they didn't get so annoying. But it really is important. And sometimes it's really good if your dog is prone to barking, and you don't mind a dog barking if there's somebody coming in the house, or
Right,
if
right.
there's, you don't want them to stop barking altogether. But in a disaster, in a shelter, if you have to leave to go to a shelter, or if you have to go to a hotel because there's danger where you're living and your dog barks incessantly, you'll be asked to leave.
Yeah.
So making sure your pets either know the command quiet, or if they just can't help themselves, because everyone walking in a hotel lobby or a hallway is someone I need to bark at, then being able to use a bark collar that is incredibly humane, and makes everybody less frustrated.
Yeah.
Because sometimes if the dogs have you thrown out of a hotel, then you have to sleep in your car, and that's really nasty to do when you are
Well, yeah, I
evacuating
mean,
for a
that
disaster.
just wouldn't fly because I have my son and he couldn't, it just wouldn't work. And
Yeah.
so I absolutely have to get this under control. She has to be able to be, walk on a leash. She has to be a normal dog. And
Yeah.
I don't understand why she eats the things that she eats. She ate the shea butter, she ate the putty, she eats the chocolate. I'm trying to keep those things away from her, but even things I don't think she's going to go after, she goes after.
Yeah, she seems to not have really any sort of desire to not do naughty stuff.
That's absolutely right. When my other two dogs, it was kind of a bond that we had, and they wanted to please me and be good dogs.
Well, she definitely wants to please Maggie. She has, and we have to, I put up the link to Doug Poynter's LinkedIn account too, so you can
Okay.
retry him. But we have to make sure that our pets are able to be transported in a disaster safely. That means that they're not going to have us thrown out of a hotel or our friend's house, because if you go to a friend's house and your dog is barking incessantly, here's your hat, what's your hurry as well.
Yeah.
Horses and dogs and cats, even parrots, if they're traveling with you, need to remain quiet. With parrots, you just happen to cover them so that they will not necessarily, say naughty things that they might have picked up somewhere else. Because I had a parrot who had been in a biker situation. He came to visit me because he lived with my friend Susie Sullivan, and she was going to leave him with me. However, he went on to the great parrot jungle in the sky. So he's not with us, but he was 65 years old when he died.
Wow.
So imagine if you get a baby parrot, you really need to make sure that you have backup air and a spare for caring for your parrot, because if God forbid something happens to you, that parrot's going to live for a really long time. And when Susie rescued Rocky, he had no feathers. He was just basically skin and down, because he was in a bad situation with bad food and not really healthy. And so when she got him, she nursed him back to health. and he was the most beautiful red Amazon parrot you'd ever want to see. But, you know, she had a traveling cage for him. He traveled really well. He came to my house 3 or 4 times to live while she was there, while we were whelping puppies. So he was a very good traveler. And, you know, if you have an animal that's exotic, you need to make sure they can travel. Fish can't travel, very hard to travel with fish. So you would have to make sure that whatever occurred, you could keep the tanks running. Even if you had to leave, you could keep the tanks running and hope for the best. I know for my koi fish that I had, we had a heater and everything, and we did not have an alarm. So if any of you have koi and you live in the Northeast, which it's a little better to have a koi pond in the Northeast, where the heron are less. Here in North Carolina, I would be creating a sushi bar for the herons. So I will not be having koi again. But we actually did not put an alarm on the heater, and we thought that the pond was warm enough to keep all the fish alive. And it froze over because the heater was disconnected or blew a fuse or something. So we lost our whole pond of fish. And those were our original fish and babies that came from the fish. So it was very devastating for me, as you can imagine. And that's what might happen. Human life has to come first. You have to leave. You can't scoop out your koi and make sure they're safe if there's a mudslide coming, unless you do it, you know, a week before the storm comes and you move them somewhere else. You have a fish store come. I mean, there's always, you know, fish habitats that can come and pick up the fish and maybe put them somewhere. These are things you need to think about when you have pets and you really love them and want to make sure they survive disasters. It's been incredible, the amount of weather disasters we've had. And thankfully, you and I, Susan, have not had the worst of weather. However, I have to say that North Carolina has gone into freezing 3 or 4 times, which is unheard of here. And I must say that my neighbors tell me that it's my fault, that I brought the cold weather back from New York when I got back from New York. But when I was in New York, it was 45 degrees. It was beautiful. So there was, you know, no hint of any terrible weather, except it was supposed to snow in Friday night to Saturday, which never happened, but it did snow Monday night to Tuesday, Monday afternoon to Tuesday, it did snow, and Sally and Gordon got about 3 or 4 inches, and that's not a lot. However, it does impact whether or not you're going to really want to go out. And then, of course, if you go out in that kind of weather and somebody loses control of their car and hits you, even though you have control of your car, you know, have you left someone to care for your pets if something happens to you? I know this is like a never-ending circle, right? It is incredible. But between the flooding and the mudslides and the snow and the ice, we really do need to make sure that we have our plans in place, both in our cars. In the event of an emergency, please call Deborah Hamilton to take care of my pets, even though I live very far from Susan. However, Susan would leave the number of, you know, her husband or her, you know, son or a neighbor who would then be able to at least alert everyone so that Maggie would receive the care she needed. Have you been able to connect with anyone at your vet's office to be a babysitter for her? And how did she survive the kennel that you sent her to?
Yeah, I mean, she did seem to do okay at the kennel. I mean, I don't think she was terribly happy there, but
well, we never know. We should really do videos and see if she's just pulling our leg, because she might have found her niche and they might have found the right buttons to push to have her behave herself.
Well, she, you know, when I picked her up, they gave me nothing but glowing reports, and you know, she whimpered a little bit when I got her, you know, like she was crying. And then very soon on the ride home, she was back to her usual, rah, 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 you know, barking constantly. And
well, at least that's a good place that if, God forbid, there was a disaster, you might be able to call them early and see if they could take her while you evacuated, and maybe they don't have to evacuate. However, I tell kennels and groomers all the time that there are only so many dogs you can take. And then if the disaster gets worse and you have to evacuate, make sure you can evacuate all the dogs you've taken, because
Yeah.
the people who've put the dogs with you probably can't get back to get them. So
Yeah.
make sure that if you're a kennel or you're a groomer and you've offered to take care of someone's dog, you need an air and a spare as well, because there has to be something that you can do
Right.
to get those dogs out in the event your
Right.
place is no longer safe to stay at.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably this kennel is probably really popular. It seems like everybody has dogs around here, and you know, I need to make a plan because I can't really count on that. I happen to go at a time when not a lot of people are traveling in January, so maybe they didn't have much demand. I just got lucky to get there, and
Yeah.
they were able to keep her. But I definitely, I mean, what I saw of Sarah, I do get her emails, and I was impressed with what she was doing. And, you know, if she could take Maggie and work her magic with Maggie.
But it's working her magic with Maggie and then working her magic with you, your husband, and your
Right,
son.
right.
Because Maggie is too smart not to pull the stuff she's pulling with you once she returns.
Yeah, that's true. But I think every time you kind of put her in her place, you know, she's like, oh,
Oh, you mean it? Oh,
yeah,
believe me.
maybe I'm
Yeah.
not the queen after all, or, you know.
And it's not because we want to, abuse them or take their rights away. It's that they have to live as good citizens with us and with others. And
Right,
so good citizenship. And she has a lot of things that occurred while she was young that didn't allow her to really become the dogs, the Catan that you like, the ones you had before,
yeah,
because she was a whole different situation. She didn't get out. Everybody's energy was different. So
right.
her energy was different. And
It's hard
maybe
for me to remember that because, but yeah, you have a point there. And I don't know how much of it is that versus, you know, before we even picked her up, was there something that I don't even know about?
you never know. You really never know. And unfortunately the breeder isn't available. It's interesting. Somebody wrote a post on Facebook today about the new shelter rules that have been put in place. I think it was in the UK. And she said, we really need to educate. And who we need to educate are the breeders as well as the puppy adopters, because the breeders need to take back the dogs they breed. If it doesn't work out, they need to take the dog back, no questions asked. I'm a proponent of giving them their money back too. However, if you don't want to do that, fine, but at least the owner knows the dog will go back to a place where it's known,
Right,
and then can move from there. And I'm
right,
sure that if the breeder was able to take Maggie back, given the situation you find yourself in every day, you probably would have returned Maggie back to the breeder, and just waited until a better time for you to get another dog when you had
right,
time to really care for it. I
right.
mean, everything you have on your plate makes it difficult to educate a dog in a way that gives it a good citizen. Like Mariah just got her good citizen I guess certificate. And my friend Susie Sullivan, who got it for her, said, she had to do a lot of stuff. She had to walk past dogs without sniffing at them. She had to walk past people without sniffing at them. She couldn't bark. She had to sit. She had to wait. So these are things that make them really good citizens. It's not like you're competing in obedience, but you definitely are competing in the world around you.
Yeah,
And if your dogs can't be well behaved in the world around you, and I'm not sure any dog is 100% well behaved in the world around them every minute of every day. I know that bunnies are Junie's Achilles heel. So when my neighbors see him go into orbit, when he sees a bunny, they go, but he's so calm on your walks. He walks so beautifully. He never pulls, he never does anything unless he sees a bunny. And then, ejecting my shoulder from the socket is what he does. He's very strong. And so, you have to make your own shifts in how you walk your dogs if they have this Achilles. And with Maggie, her Achilles seems to be she rules the house and she barks incessantly.
Yeah.
So the, shooting with water, I don't know if you use a spray or you use the stream.
I use a spray.
Oh yeah, I always find the stream works so much better right between the eyes. So when
Really?
my dogs were in the house in Armhunk and if we had the washing machine guy, because we had a washing machine down there, or anybody come down to do work at the house, we always had a spray bottle and it was always on a stream. And when they were little babies, if they did something naughty, I would shoot them from across the room with the stream. And they'd be like, where did that come from? Oh my God. And it would get their attention and it would stop them from doing it. And then you tell them what a good dog they are when they come to you. Spraying her with water gets to be way too much fun, but spraying them with a stream and, right somewhere where it's, I wouldn't go in her ears or anything, but, right here.
Yeah.
Works really, really well, catches their attention and will stop them. And if you can shoot it into her mouth as she's barking, that'll stop her from barking too. And if it has some bitter apple in it or some lemon juice, that'll stop her from barking as well. She'll be like, yuck, this is terrible. So I always tell my owners when they go home with puppies, if they start barking incessantly, that's why they made bitter apple, and that's why they made lemon juice, because you put it in a bottle and when they start barking, you spray them. You can't spray that in their eyes or by their head or anything. That you would have to squirt it in her mouth. But that would stop her from barking, at least for a minute, while she was like, what is this in my mouth? It's not
into the mouth. Okay.
Yeah, it's non-toxic. It's not going to hurt her. Hopefully she won't get any more of the hand strengthening putty. But thank God that came out okay. So I would say that, we started out this conversation by talking about disasters, and Maggie has to be able to be mobile if a disaster strikes Virginia. So call Doug Poynter, who I think lives nearer to you, or call Sarah and say to her, listen, can you help? And remember, for everyone, you need to be able to have your dog do what your trainer can have your dog do, because having a trainer get your dog to a certain position is fabulous if your trainer is going to live with you. And when the disaster comes, your trainer is going to help you get your dog out. Not going to happen. So make sure that when you get a trainer, you ask them how much training they do of you, to assure that what they're training the dog to do, you can then do once they're not there. And then practice, 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 because it is all about conditioning the dogs to do a better job in your presence as well as in the trainer's presence. So Susan, has this helped at all, hon?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the dog collar as well. I did look into one, Dogtra YS 300. It's not that expensive. I think it's, they sell it on Amazon for less than $100. And, if it saves my sanity, or at least gets her started on the right track.
Well, working with someone to know how to use it and when to use it would be helpful too. So check out Doug and check out Sarah, see what they say. I know they are gentle trainers, so they may or may not approve of a buzzing collar. I know with Junie, when we take him to the beach, we do use a buzzing collar. We'd never buzz it. We sort of have it beep. It has a sound, and that's enough for him because he's a very soft dog. So he just gets a sound. But Maggie might need a little bit of a reminder, which is just sort of a vibration, not a shock, but just sort of a vibration, so that would work.
The only reason I didn't order it was because I thought I probably wouldn't be able to get it on her without, getting my hands cut up and,
And you have to get it on and off, because it can't be left on all
Yeah,
the time, because you have to recharge it. So,
right.
it has to go on and off. So I think starting with Doug or starting with Sarah, because if some disaster occurs, you need to be able to move Maggie and get her where she needs to be safe.
Yeah, and I don't want to have to deal with a wild woman dog, you know.
I know. I know. And she has definitely created a situation in your home and in your life that makes it difficult to have her. And we don't want dogs to be difficult to have. We want them to be the bane of our existence. Not the bane of our existence, but the love of our lives, to give us that endorphin rush, the positive
Yeah,
endorphin rush
yeah,
that we get when they hug us or they love us or whatever, because that's why pets should be, the human animal bond is so important. So until next week, guys, I'm so glad you were here, Susan. I'm so glad we got to talk about disasters and how to prepare
yeah.
for them. I hope no one has a disaster. This is Deborah Hamilton, Hamilton Law and Mediation, the Why Do Pets Matter podcast, and of course, this wonderful MAAP community. Let me know if you have any questions about what to do in a disaster. I'll be happy to answer them.